Over 70 scholars are calling on China and the U.S. to put aside their partisan interests and coordinate responses to COVID-19. But will their plea be heard? And as COVID-19 fatalities rise in the U.S., so has Trump's approval ratings. What's the story behind this latest poll? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Chuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Over 70 scholars from both China and the U.S. are urging their country's leaders to put aside their differences and coordinate their responses to COVID-19. In the open letter published by the New York Times on May 1st, the letter says power should be focused on caring for others and marshaling resources for disease prevention, not on deflecting blame, shoring up approval ratings, settling scores, or demonizing people because of ethnicity or nationality. But will their voices be heard? And given relationships can take years to nurture and seconds to destroy, how can the two sides rebuild trust to fight the common enemy? I'm pleased to be joined via Skype by Professor Gong from University of International Business and Economics. And on the phone with us is Mr. Weiwen, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Great to have you, both of you, with us. So let's begin with this open letter. We have some quotes here I want to show to our viewers. In other words, more politics, not less, is required when it comes to COVID-19. Relationships can take years to nurture and only moments to destroy, especially given how a tweet and maybe or reported cue can circulate globally in an instant. And that is the lesson we pass along with our students regularly. There is no place today for politicians to traffic in conspiracy theories or insulting language about virological origins. Let me start with you, Professor Gong, here. What's the most important messages the scholars want to communicate to government officials in both Washington and Beijing?
Well, I think this letter sends an unequivocal message that saving lives is the first priority, and it should be the only priority right now. People are still dying in the United States. The infection numbers are still going up. This is a time for the countries to put aside politics and cooperate on things that can save lives. In terms of scientific research, in terms of coordination of supplies, medical supplies from China to the United States, and also in cooperation of at the medical side, the hospital level. At this point, there's nothing more important than saving lives. I keep saying this. And I think it's quite regrettable that the message coming from the White House, from the State Department, have been so far pretty much concentrated on politics. And that's quite regrettable and deplorable. I hope things will change. I understand that President Trump is very much preoccupied with the re-election and this year. But this is not the time to talk about politics again. It's saving more lives. It's going to elevate his rating with the American people. So this is the first priority. I think the scholars both in China and the United States well understand this, and I hope that folks at the White House get this message.
But what's interesting is that there's one thing worth noting from this open letter. We often hear about the danger of politicizing pandemics. But the letter this time says this crisis requires more politics. Mr. He, let me bring you into this. What do you think? Why do you think this is?
Hi. Yes. Ask me. Yes. There are different politics. We say we oppose to politicizing the pandemics means the political government leaders should not switch the real fight against COVID-19 to its own political interest, that is, for the re-election of during the current year or for supporting their government or to fight China strategically. That's their politics. But the letter opposes this politics but supports another politics, that is, to put the people's lives, the people's happiness, and the world cooperation first. That's the biggest politics behind our fight against the pandemic, and which is higher than the politics of the government leaders.
But why has it been so hard, Professor Gong, for the U.S. and China to work together to fight COVID-19?
I think...
Professor Gong, please.
Okay, sorry about this. Well, I think it's very much due to politics. I think it's very clear to me that what the Republican leadership as well as the President Trump in the White House, what they're trying to do is basically to shift the blame to pass the buck and provide political cover for a job that it's totally screwed up. If you look at the Trump administration has been doing in February and March, I think it's very much close to a total fiasco. The fact that we have the largest infection numbers, the largest death tolls in the United States tells something. We don't see this kind of numbers in South Korea, for example, in Japan, for example, in other European countries, but only in the United States that we see skyrocketing numbers. So, clearly, President Trump and his administration should be responsible for what's happening in the United States. And I think his administration understands that and trying to shift the blame. And this is typically what happens after a pandemic. It's not just happening with the Trump administration. I think across the American main streets, the public always have this kind of a sentiment that they want to find somebody to blame. Historically, that's also the kind of sentiment we see after every pandemic. People trying to find a scapegoat. People who have lost family members, who have lost jobs, who have lost income, they all tend to do that. I think it's okay. We need to understand that. But it is totally wrong to fan that kind of a sentiment, to politicize this, and to provide political cover for himself. I think we have to draw a line here. This is a line that the current administration should not cross over.
And last month, a similar letter was actually released by almost 100 former high-ranking U.S. officials and scholars in response to 100 Chinese scholars, which urged China and the U.S. to put competition on hold while working together to fight COVID-19. And Mr. Weiwen, joining us on the phone there, you were a signatory on this previous letters. What happened after you signed this last letter? Have you seen any improvements? Did you see any evidence that officials in the U.S. or in China are listening to the letter you signed or this most recent letter?
I think there are different responses. In China, it's supported by both the government and the public. And in the U.S., I think we won some support from the American scholars and some of the former U.S. high officials who also responded with a letter just in 24 hours. Although the letters somewhat different from ours, they are still, on the whole, supporting for cooperation. But anyway, regretfully, we haven't seen any improvement or any positive response from the U.S. government, from the Trump administration. And over the past month, we have seen some deteriorating in the bilateral relations. We have seen the stepping up of the efforts from the Trump administration in demonizing China and stabilizing the efforts to demanding China for compensation. That's a very serious step. And this causes a lot of worry for the years ahead.
And the Chinese embassy in the U.S. responded to the letter on its Twitter accounts, quoting this part of the letter: "Now is the time instead for rebuilding global public health alliances such as the World Health Organization, renewing scientific exchanges, and communicating respectively across borders." But we haven't seen any responses from the U.S. side yet. Professor Gong, why not a response? Does the lack of a response mean officials haven't read it, or don't know about it, or just don't care?
No, I don't think they haven't read it. Of course they have read it. It's just that it's not in their interest. It's very regrettable that the Trump administration is going the exact opposite direction. He is discontinuing the funding for the WHO. He's waging essentially a war against WHO. And this time, his Deputy National Security Advisor, Matthew Pottinger, is going out to pressure the intelligence officers in the intelligence community to come up with evidence to support his conspiracy lab theory. This is very, very unusual. Mr. Pottinger himself, being an informal intelligence officer himself, would go out and pressure his former peers to come up with the things that he likes to see. In my opinion, this is the exact opposite of intelligence work. And it's like you have a conclusion already, and you shop for evidence. I actually, published an article, an OPD article at the CGTN website, opinion page. I give my article's title called "Evidence Shopping at the what I call the Intelligence Bazaar." It's very regrettable that they would take this kind of attitude. Now, immediately you see a report coming out. I mean, I think the day before yesterday, there was a report coming from the Homeland Security saying that China, was holding medical supplies in early January and mid-January. I haven't seen that report yet, but I think this kind of effort at a critical time like this, spending so much effort to come up with a report like this, is totally opposite of the cooperative spirit that we need at this very critical moment to fight this vicious virus.
And the letter says there is no place today for politicians to endanger bilateral ties by spreading conspiracies or insulting language about virological origins. But irresponsible conspiracy theories abound among U.S. politicians. During an interview on Sunday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo kept pushing the Trump administration's lab theory, adding that there is enormous evidence that COVID-19 originated in a lab in Wuhan. And this is after the reiterated that the new coronavirus was of natural origin on Friday. And Trump even contradicted his own intelligence agencies last week by suggesting that he has seen evidence that supports his lab theory. Professor Gong, again, why is Trump administration so obsessed with playing scientists and coming up with unfounded theories? What are the dangers here?
Well, if you listen very carefully to Secretary Pompeo's interview, it was very much contradictory. First he said that he has a lot of evidence that this is a man-made virus, and then he was asked, look, the office of, as you said, the office of Director for National Intelligence has come up with a statement saying this cannot be a man-made virus, and he said, no, I don't agree with that. So, his statements himself within 2 minutes are not consistent with each other. I don't even know what he's talking about here. So, how much credibility to what he said is I have a big question mark about this. So, I'm very skeptical about the prospect that the United States government has any significant substantive evidence to show this is not even just a man-made virus, but just a leak from the virology lab in Wuhan is very much questionable, because otherwise they've already come out and announced this evidence. They haven't announced anything yet. A few days ago, when President Trump was pressed with this question, he said, yeah, I know this, but I can't tell you. Several days have passed. No evidence coming out so far. And again, Secretary Pompeo is saying contradictory things within 2 minutes. So it's very difficult for me not to associate this with outright lying, actually.
And you just mentioned the issue of protective equipment, Professor Gong. I want to hear Mr. He's perspective on this. So, Mr. He, a recent Department of Homeland Security report says China likely cut its export of medical supplies prior to its January WHO notification that a COVID-19 is a contagion. Meantime, according to Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying, as of March 20th, China has provided the U.S. with more than 2.46 billion masks, meaning 7 masks for each in the U.S., plus nearly 5,000 ventilators and many others. And Mr. He, if China really wanted to hoard personal protective equipment to make profit, why would China be sending so many supplies to the U.S. and other countries too? What's the rationale here? And some analysts say that while U.S. President Donald Trump is busy shifting this blame, China has become a global leader in its humanitarian response by providing these medical supplies, masks, ventilators, even doctors to countries that are in critical need of help, including the U.S. What's your assessments here?
Okay, then first of all about the Department of Homeland Security. I think the job of their job is to protect the American homeland for the security, and nothing to do with the China's supply of medical exports. And they said China likely cut its exports. That means likely. They didn't know the real, if that's true. They just say likely. So nowadays it is quite unusual that the offenders can offend you anything without any evidence. They just say likely. They can say anything bad to you. But then we, as the respondent, have to produce this evidence, this and that, to show that we are not that way. We are doing the right thing. I think first of all, we should say the Homeland Security Department is not based, has no fact-based, it's nonsense. Then we say, actually, we are exporting heavily medical supplies. And according to the latest data from the Chinese customs, during the April alone, we had the 10 days, the first 10 days of April, we had every 1 billion yuan exports of the medical supplies per day. And during the last 10 days of April, we had 3 billion yuan export of medical supplies per day. So this growing so fast. Up to now, we have exported total 28 billion masks and over 49,000 ventilators. That's huge. So that's quite right. So in our mind, that it's China's responsibility as a big power, big country, to support the world, to help fight the virus, to support the different various countries. So far, we have supported over 131 countries and international organizations. That's an obligation without anything. That's nothing. That's without any say. Then the second thing is normal trade. That China never imposed any restrictions on exports. So, and on the contrary, we have been stepping up our efforts, and the factories are running 24 hours a day to produce more for exports. So you see, China's supplies is starting, it's moving around the whole world, and no other countries can do that. So that is our obligation. We don't care whether they will say that China is good or bad. That's our obligation. We should do that. And that's the real worry of Donald Trump, because they said America used to be the leader in the world whenever the public health crisis comes up. But this time it's China, not America. But this the problem of their own. They should step up. They should support WHO. They should support other countries instead of just finding scapegoats.
And they're not doing that. They're pulling funds from the WHO, and rows and deflecting blame would not defeat the coronavirus for sure. But one thing is for sure, blame games only intensifies distrust. We're going to have to leave you there. Thank you very much, Professor Gong, University of International Business and Economics, and Mr. Weiwen, Senior Fellow at Center for China and Globalization.